Hello, welcome to another episode of Fill the Screens podcast. Today we'll be talking about Nightmare on Elm Street 3. So after the success of the first Nightmare on Elm Street movie, Robert Shea, the guy who owns this entire operation, he wanted to put a movie out as soon as possible, so he kind of moved on from Wes Craven, and that's why we got we got number 2, which kind of rebelled against everything number 1 did. Not really in a bad way. I mean, there's different fills for each of these different 3 movies. Like, the first one is a pretty self-contained little horror story. Number 2 is just kind of a rebel all on its own. Like, it's kind of goofy, it's funny. You're used to a final girl, we had a final guy, we had all these rules set up in number 1, number 2 kind of ignored all of them, and they're like, well, Freddy's not really this dream guy anymore, he's now possessing Jesse. And then number 3 kind of like brings it back to the lore. I mean, not only does it bring it back to the rules at number 1, it also expands upon it. Like, it takes it a little bit further in a cool way. Now, Wes Craven did write a lot of the screenplay. It was fixed up a bit. It was a little bit different than how Wes Craven originally put it. But I mean, the whole overarching story is basically Wes Craven. Alright, so let's talk about the beginning of this film. We have our main girl, Kristen, played by Patricia Arquette. The movie starts off right away. It starts off with this kind of eerie score, but then it kind of transitions into like this rock, into the fire. It really kind of sets the mood of the entire film. This entire film just kind of, it rocks in general, and the music fits. We have Dream Warriors by Token. One thing I gotta say, I love the soundtrack of this movie. If you want an 80s movie, like, this is the go-to right here. So Kristen's doing like this arts and crafts project that includes like pasting and doing all this stuff during like this little intro, into the fire. I don't know, I just recall when I was younger, because my dad had this movie playing all the time when I was younger, and I always thought this beginning of this film was just, I don't know, it was awesome. I always thought to myself, I'm like, you know what, when I get older, I'm going to do arts and crafts projects too and stay up really late. Like, that sounds pretty cool. It didn't quite pan out that way, but I don't know, as a younger person, like, I just thought this was cool in general. Like, it was almost like rebelling. But of course, like, her mom gets home, and you kind of find out her mom's not a very good mom. She like basically scolds her to get to bed. She's like, Mom, I was waiting up for you. And then you hear her like boyfriend, or her guest as she calls it, like, hey, where's the bourbon? And then she goes, I gotta get downstairs, I have guest. And Kristen's just like, yeah, you don't want to keep him waiting. And then she goes, no, I don't, I need to go down there. And Kristen goes to sleep. I mean, having not very good parents is kind of just a theme throughout all these movies. Whether you have Jesse's dad who's blaming him for birds blowing up, or, you have Marge in the first one. I'm surprised Marge isn't hanging with Kristen's mom, They're drinking alcohol. I'm sure Marge needs something to do. Oh, wait, no, she's dead. I forgot. I guess you can't do that. Anyway, the first dream, it takes Kristen to what is Freddy Krueger's house. And it's kind of odd because, like, 2's like, oh no, it's his factory. Like, this is where Freddy worked, and this is where he took all the kidnapped kids. But then you see his house, and all the dead bodies are there. I think it makes more sense for Freddy to do it at his house rather than like a factory. Unless number 2 was implying that factory was his house, which it was way too big. It was basically a steel mill. But I mean, regardless, like, Freddy has the furnace in his house. Like, Freddy just loves furnaces, whether he's working or at his house. Like, he's got these ginormous furnaces so he can just burn dead kids as he kills them, I guess. But this house, like, the scene does a good job of establishing, like, the scariness of Freddy, too. Because, like, this movie, to me, it's like the perfect balance between awesome fantasy rock and roll, and yet Freddy Krueger still has like his scary moments. And this house is one of them. There's literally like there's kids hanging from a ceiling as she walks in. Like, it's awful. Like, and Kristen's scared. I'd be like terrified. Like, I wouldn't be able to move if I saw these hanging kids and there's a little girl on a tricycle. She's like, Freddy's home. And it's like, oh, dear God. And Freddy starts chasing Kristen. Really good scene. And you think she wakes up for a moment. She goes into the bathroom, and the faucet, grabs her hand, and then Freddy's claw, cuts her wrist, and then her mom walks in and thinks that she's trying to commit suicide. So the mom sends Kristen to Weston Hills, a psychiatric ward. And what a great place to have a scary movie in general, let alone a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. Working at this hospital, we have Dr. Gordon, we have Max, who ends up being Morpheus. That's pretty cool. There's also Dr. Sims, which Dr. Gordon, it's a cool little shot in the beginning. Dr. Gordon goes up to Sims and is like, oh, we have a grad student coming to work for us. And, Sims is kind of like, oh, okay. She's just a Debbie Downer throughout this entire film. But the grad student walks in, and guess who's back again. Nancy's back. Yep, Heather Langenkamp's back for this film. And again, I said it in the first film, but I've kind of criticized Halloween because it sometimes feels forced on how they bring Jamie Lee Curtis back for, one of their films. Where they're retconning sequels or, just making entirely different storylines. Like the Nightmare on Elm Street series, whenever they bring Nancy back or Heather Langenkamp back, they do it in very creative ways. And this is one of them. She comes back older, more experienced. She knows how to handle this sleeping stuff. And Kristen, whenever she's being admitted, she's freaking out. Has a little knife. She cuts Max. And Nancy comes right in and calms her down. She understands Kristen. Soon after, they introduce us to other characters who are patients as well. We have Joey. Joey's a sleepwalker, and he also makes puppets. There's Kincaid, who has kind of an anger problem. He gets forced into the quiet room a lot, but Kincaid's kind of got a goofy side to him, to which, he's kind of a big teddy bear, but he also just has some rage out moments, which is kind of cool. Then there's Joey, who's mute, and man, does he love the ladies. He's in love with one of the nurses that work there. Joey's just a ladies' man. Ladies are his Achilles heel. A little after these exchanges and a few of these introductions, Dr. Gordon and Nancy, they're doing really well. Gordon really likes Nancy. He's like, I'm gonna take you under my wing, and while they're talking, she drops her purse, and out spills a prescription bottle, and it says Hypnosil. And Dr. Gordon does his research. He goes straight to the computer, and he's like, what's this Hypnosil? And basically, it's this experimental drug that suppresses dreams. Good find, Nancy. Dr. Gordon also starts seeing a nun just randomly throughout the hospital, on the grounds of it, and that's kind of weirding him out a bit. But anyways, Nancy, she goes to visit Kristen's home, I believe it is, and there she spots the papier-mâché project that Kristen was working on, which, with how good that house looked, Kristen has a future in making papier-mâché houses. She's working with popsicle sticks here, and the end product is so impressive. But anyway, she sees the house that's in the beginning of the film, which, now that I think about it, I said it's Freddy's house. Now that I'm thinking about it, it looked like Nancy's house. It's probably Nancy's house. Okay, let's roll with it. So Nancy starts putting two to two together, realizing that her and Kristen, they are indeed in the same boat. This is probably Freddy doing all the work here. And Kristen, she falls asleep again, and this time she's in the house. There's a hog roast, and the hog comes alive. It's like, Rat! And it scares Kristen, and then Freddy comes back as a gigantic worm and starts to devour her. And while this is happening, Kristen kind of calls out. It links, when she yells, it kind of links her and Heather together, and Heather falls through her chair into Kristen's dream. When Nancy saves Kristen from Freddy by stabbing him in the eye, Freddy looks right at Nancy, and it's a cool little moment in the film. It kind of acknowledges that Nancy was the OG person that beat Freddy, and Freddy just kind of gives her a look, and he's like, you. And in his head, he's probably like, Jesus freaking Christ, this girl again. She was the first one to defeat me, she's back. But yeah, Nancy wakes up, so does Kristen, and Nancy realizes the cut on her hand, it is indeed there in real life, so the dream actually happened. Well, of course the dream happened, but you know what I mean. Eventually we have our first group therapy session. And this is where we meet some of the other patients in the hospital. You know, the movie doesn't throw it all on you. Like, it shows you, like, about 3 patients, and we come back. We get the rest of them. We have Will, who's in a wheelchair, and he's really a bit nerdy. He's really into, like, D&D type stuff. We have Jennifer, who wants to be an actress as soon as she gets out of Weston Hills. She would probably get along great with Pearl. Then we have Taryn, who has a history of drug problems. We realize in this group therapy session that all these patients, they're all having the same dream about the same guy with the knives for hands, Freddy. And of course Dr. Sims, who's the Debbie Downer, she's like, oh, it's just a manifestation of your guilt and your sex drive, and she's going into like these weird explanations. You really grow to not like Sim. She's like the bad parent in this film who just doesn't believe in anything. At least Dr. Gordon can kind of be swayed one way or another, but Sims is intended to be the bad parent, and that's exactly what she is. Freddy's first kill in this movie with Phil. Freddy turns into a puppet himself. It's like a stop motion puppet. And I'm not a big fan of stop motion, but it works here because, I don't know, it gives Puppet Master vibes a little bit, so I like it. But he goes up to Phil, he kind of like cuts his arms open and like basically turns him into a puppet with like his tendons or I don't know, whatever you want to call them. I don't know the human body that well. But yeah, turns Phil into a puppet and Phil starts like sleepwalking and he goes out into the window of this gigantic hospital. And while this is going on, the back and forth between the different patients / characters in this movie is like one of the best things. You like all of the characters, they work well together, even during this moment where Phil is completely doomed. They're doing all they can to try to stop it. Like, they're bashing out windows, yelling for him. Joey, he's taking a tray, banging on all the doors, trying to alert as many people as possible, but Freddy makes Phil fall from the window, and it gets blamed as a suicide. Which, after Phil's death, Dr. Gordon, he's a good character in the movie. You like Dr. Gordon, but there's sometimes, man, he just takes left turns pretty hard. He's talking to the group, and, this is a psychiatric hospital. You think he'd be good talking about hard issues. But he's literally telling the group, guys, you can't quit. Philip was a quitter. He quit on us. He let us all down. You can't quit. And it's like, dude, think about where you are. And you're talking to his friends. What a horrible thing to say. Since Dr. Gordon's motivational speech wasn't helping, Nancy decided to push the agenda of hey, we need to give these kids Hypnosil. I think it'll help. It'll get them to quit worrying about their dreams. And Dr. Gordon, he's on board with it. But of course, Dr. Sims is absolutely not. And Gordon's oh, come on, I think it's worth a try. And she's basically only if you take full responsibility of it. And Dr. Gordon's fine, I like Nancy, let's do this. We get a scene of Jennifer watching TV, kind of dreaming of being the star of whatever she's watching. She's literally burning herself with cigarettes, trying to stay awake. How gnarly. But it doesn't work. Jennifer's watching this late night show, and this scene, honestly, it cracks me up. Not just because of the iconic line, but it's literally a late night show, and there's this late night host talking to an actress, and he goes, hey, can I ask you something? And she's like, why, certainly. And then it cuts to Freddy as the late night host. And he's like, who gives a fuck what you think? And then he attacks her. The TV does cut to static, and Jennifer, instead of being panicked by what she just saw, she goes up to the TV and slaps it. And then the TV grows arms, and it's Freddy. And Freddy's like, this is your big break, Jennifer. Welcome to prime time, bitch. And slams her into the TV head first and kills her. It's a great kill. It's one of the iconic ones in this film. So Dr. Gordon's totally into Nancy. They're literally having like little candlelight dinners. And Nancy kind of uses this to her advantage. I don't know if she actually likes Dr. Gordon, but she kind of uses this to kind of push her agenda. Like, hey, listen, we got to quit tiptoeing around this. Like, we need to talk to the kids about what this dream demon actually is. I've experienced this, and Dr. Gordon's like, oh, sure, babe. So they had the little group therapy session. They try to make sure Sims isn't there. And Nancy kind of gives them the lowdown, like, hey, Kristen has the power to pull people into dreams. You all have your certain powers. We can use it to defeat Freddy. Then, this becomes the whole Dream Warrior aspect of the movie. Like, they're going to war with Freddy. So they all do the session, and they all go into the dream world. And in the dream world, Will can walk. And then he's also like, I'm also the wizard master. And everyone's like, oh, cool, Will. Kincaid has super strength. Taryn says in her dreams that she's beautiful, and then she flips open her knives, and bad. Which a lot of people say it's cringy, but I could see it kind of fit in her personality. The thing about these dreams, like a lot of them are like, they go along with the character's personality, so it's kind of cool. After seeing Will go for like the wizard master and like doing magic and stuff, like, Kristen does like a bunch of somersaults. And it's kind of like, really, Kristen? Like that's what you settled for? And even Kincaid's, the super strength, like I would have like turned to steel, like that would have been a cool combo with super strength. Beautiful, bad, and I shoot lasers out of my eyes. Like the kids could have went a little further. They're selling themselves short, as Dr. Gordon would say. You're quitting on yourselves, you can't quit. Joey's superpower is, he just wants to sleep with the nurse. So he goes and finds the hot nurse, and it ends up being Freddy Krueger. He ties Joey to the bed with, like, his long tongue. It's pretty gnarly, and the cool thing about these movies is you never know, like, when Freddy's gonna pop out. And this is a good moment of that. And Freddy's like, what's wrong, Joey? Got your tongue tied? Freddy traps the rest of them in the room. Joey's suspended above the bed, and there's a gigantic fire pit underneath him. Eventually, Debbie Downer Sims comes in, and she wakes all of them up. She tells the superior, and they fire Dr. Gordon from the place. And they do have good reasoning. They're like, since this happened, there's been 2 suicides, and now a kid's in a coma. And Dr. Gordon was all like, yeah, they're quitters. No, he didn't say that. He's just kind of like, oh, okay. And then he like follows around the nun some more and hangs around Nancy. The nun ends up giving Dr. Gordon the backstory to Freddy Krueger. It's about a nurse that was locked in a room and she was raped a lot of times. And she said Freddy Krueger was the bastard son of 100 maniacs. Pretty crazy backstory. Anyway, she also kind of like tells him how Freddy needs to be defeated. You need to bury him in hollow ground, bury his body. And during this time, like, Freddy's just kind of like antagonizing the group. Carves into Joey's chest, come and get him, bitch. And you would think she would like show the superior, but I guess they'd be like, well, what the hell, Nancy? Why are you cutting up Joey? And they'd probably blame her, so probably good thing she didn't. Nancy ends up meeting up with her dad, which is a cool tie-in to the first. Same actor. And there, Nancy's dad, he's drunk. Like, you can tell he took a pretty big decline. After the first movie, he took the bad habits of Marge, and now he's drinking all the time. And Nancy, like, she runs off. She has to go do something, and Dr. Gordon, like, he doesn't even small talk. Like, he literally, like, grabs Nancy's dad, like, roughs him up a bit, and he's like, you need to help us. And Nancy's dad's like, all right. And so Dr. Gordon takes Nancy's dad to go find Freddy's body. And Dr. Gordon has Nancy's dad drive. Like, Nancy's dad was just drunk. And Gordon's like, all right, you drive. I was like, all right, Dr. Gordon. When Nancy rounds up the group to go back into the dream world to get Freddy, there's some really good sequences. There's one, it's back, basically the scene that we saw in the very beginning with Kristen doing her arts and crafts project. her mom coming in, scolding her just like before. But then Freddy Krueger yanks her out of the bedroom and he screams, "I said, where's the bourbon?" And then he's like holding her severed head, which is really bloody. That was a really good scene. The scene where Taryn and Freddy get into a knife fight, and then Freddy's fingers turn into syringes. That's pretty dark, and he kills her too. Literally her wounds where she did drugs at, they were literally like screaming or talking, like opening up. Really gross. So that was a pretty good scene. Freddy squares off with Will, and Will's walking around, and Freddy has that wheelchair that has like a bunch of spikes on it and stuff, and it's like shooting out at him. And Will's like, "Oh yeah, I'm the Wizard Master," and he blows up the chair. When I was a little kid, I thought that was so cool. I really did. It's a little corny now. You're like, "Oh man, the Wizard Master." But when I was younger, I was like, "Oh, that'd be awesome. Like I would shoot powerful beams out of my hands too." But Freddy disposes of him really quick. He's like, "Sorry, kid, don't believe in fairy tales," and just ends him right then and there. The rest of the Dream Warriors, they finally start to square off with Freddy, and Freddy kind of has to float between distracting the dads. Well, I say the dads. Nancy's dad and Dr. Gordon. Dr. Gordon's basically a dad. He's old enough to be Nancy's dad, it seems like. But he's there. He has to fight them off. I didn't really care for the scene where the skeletons walk in. It's like Freddy's dead body. It kind of reminds me of Army of Darkness to a degree. It would have been like kind of cooler if it was actually Freddy himself. But I don't know. Maybe he just couldn't make it to shoot that day. I don't know. But the fight with the Dream Warriors, though, that stuff's really cool. Freddy reveals his chest. He has all the people that he killed trapped inside of him, and that gives him power. And they go back and forth. When it finally feels like Freddy's about to pull all the warriors into a mirror, Joey finds his power. He screams, "No!" And all the mirrors like shatter, and like all the warriors like fall out of it, so like he saved them. And like it almost turns into a cheesy moment, like they're like, "Joey, you found your power." And then like Nancy's dad like shows up in ghost form, and he's like, "Nancy, I'm so proud of you." And he hugs Nancy, but then it's a trick by Freddy, and he stabs Nancy. It's actually pretty surprising if you don't see it coming, if you don't know the movie. Dr. Gordon ends up waking up in the hole, climbing out, shoving Freddy's skeleton in the hole, pouring holy water on it, and like using a cross, and that's like what finally defeats Freddy. And I'm going to be honest, it's a lot better of an ending, I feel, than number 1 or number 2. It's a lot more satisfying to see him go in this big final showdown, rather than in number 1, Nancy being like, "I don't believe in you." Or number 2, Lisa being like, "Jesse, I love you," and kissing him, and then like Freddy just explodes. Like, this one feels like an actual battle, and it's pretty cool. Nancy does die in this movie, and I feel like it does give the film a little bit more weight, too. I mean, like, other Dream Warriors died. Like, no one really felt safe in the movie. Like, there's times, I'm sure the first time you're watching it, it's been so long since I watched it as a kid, I don't remember what happens, but I remember as a kid, like, as he's, like, dragging him in the mirror, I was legitimately worried, like, "Oh no, Kincaid, Kristen, like, who's gonna go next?" But then, like, Nancy bites the dust, and that's one you don't really expect. Because they could have easily just been like, okay, Nancy's just going to be, like, the Dr. Loomis and, like, continually help different kids defeat Freddy, which probably would have been cool. But, I mean, they had the arc for the character. They brought her back in a cool way, and they had her leave in a cool way. In a good movie. They also tie up the loose end of the nun, too. It ends up being Freddy Krueger's mom, so... this movie does a good job of having like all these wild threads, and they all link together, and they all solve the problem by the end. It's a pretty legit good movie. The only character you probably really feel bad for is Dr. Gordon. I mean, if he had the hots for Nancy, he lost her, he lost his job. At her funeral, he has his arm in a bandage. I think his neck's in a brace, and like a patch over his eye. He's pretty beaten up. It's like, where does that dude go from now? He's probably calling Nancy a quitter at her funeral, but oh well. So yeah, this is our review of Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 Dream Warriors. A very, very solid movie. I think this literally makes Freddy Krueger the icon that he is. Like a top-notch movie. You look at the Mount Rushmore of like Halloween, Friday the 13th, and Nightmare on Elm Street. Like this one's among the top of the tops. So like this is just a great movie, great soundtrack, great characters. You like them all. It's fun. Some parts are a bit funny, a bit goofy, but overall, very solid movie. If you like this review, feel free to subscribe so you hear later episodes. And, if you give this episode a like, it really helps the channel and gets it out to other people. Again, if you're listening, thank you so much. And until next time.